Hi. Oh my goodness. It's
Hi.
so exciting to finally be here doing this with you.
Oh my God, I'm thrilled and you look great, by the way.
Thank you. It was struggle city behind the scenes, so thank you so much.
It doesn't show. You look great.
Is that ring light glow?
You got a lot of reasons to glow. You're glowing.
Yeah, this is actually going to be the last episode I think I record until
No way.
baby is Earthside. So
Oh boy. We better
no
make it a
press, make it
fun.
special.
You know what? I love that. No way.
So
I love that for both of us.
I love it for us. A
A
lot writing on this, so we
milestone.
better deliver.
Fabulous conversation like we always do.
Like we always do. This time I'll just be recording you, but I'm
Exactly.
so stoked because I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the years, but namely was so impressed a couple of years ago. Lionsgate hosted a really beautiful dinner for producers and executives to come and gather and talk about this is before the before times. This is like
Yeah.
early 22 when things were
Mhm.
still looking up for us, just to have intentional conversations around exactly where we are today
Yep.
when it comes
Yep.
to inclusion. You are a very impressive lady and very inspiring lady. Just like
Oh,
reading
thank
your bio alone, I was like, what? Oh, impressive. My goodness.
Oh
And
my
you're
God.
just getting started. I'm, again, just so thrilled to have you on to get to pick your brain, share a little bit about, your journey and your wisdom with the listeners,
Thank
especially as
you.
we open up the aperture and talk to others that are not traditional producers. So
Yeah,
thank you for being here.
I'm honored to be one of the few non-traditional producers that gets invited to this prestigious show. So I can't wait to chat. There's so much.
There's so
Oh,
much. I always like to give context, right? So to start just at the beginning,
yeah.
born in
Okay.
Jamaica,
Yep.
come to New York as a child. How
Yep.
old were you? And then clearly we're like shared the same origin story with like immigrant
Right.
parents, being immigrants
Yes.
ourselves, and like the work ethic that comes from that. So tell us.
I landed in the US when I was about 4. So, as you said, I was born in Jamaica. My dad first moved to the US because he's an economist. He was an economics professor. He was
Hmm.
working on his dissertation and he had gotten a Fulbright, and that brought him to NYU.
Oh,
And
wow.
then my mom, who's working at a bank in Jamaica, like we waited the few months or so that you have to wait, to kind of move the rest of your family up here. So I'm fuzzy on the details, but I know this is a pretty typical immigrant journey where one parent comes first, sets
Mm,
up shop in some way, then brings the rest of the family.
yeah.
So my mom and I came later. We moved to the Bronx. So when people say like, how do you think about your identity? Even though I spent most of my life in America and I think of myself in many ways as very American, my parents spent most of their lives in Jamaica. Now it's probably actually most of their lives in America too, but their
Hmm.
formative years in Jamaica. And my mom comes from a big family. My dad also has siblings. And so there was a lot of Jamaican influence in my household. So I do feel like I've earned the right to say I'm a Jamaican. At the very least, I'm a Jamaican American, but heavy American upbringing, context, and all of that. And that, I think, from an early age just shaped the way that I looked at the world, because I think when you are an immigrant, you have that sort of dual POV right away. Because there's ways in which, especially when you come as a child, where you
Yeah.
feel like an insider, but you also feel like an outsider. So it's like with
Yeah.
my immediate family, like I always felt like I'm the American and they're the Jamaicans. But then when you're spending time with your American friends, you're like, they're the Americans and I'm the immigrant, or I'm the foreigner, or I'm the Jamaican, depending on what it is. And
Yeah.
even with respect to like being in Black communities, when people say African American, sometimes they're not being specific. They just mean like all Black people. But that's like African American is like a very specific type, a very specific segment of the Black community, right? And especially growing up, I would have a lot of just experiences where I would be reminded that I am Black, I am Caribbean, I am not African American, though I identify as very strongly American, because there's differences in our upbringings and our cultures and our experiences. And I've learned over time to have a lot of humility and just self-awareness about where those differences are. It's not just one big homogenous Black people pile.
Yeah. So much to unpack there, but I wonder at what point in your journey were you able to disseminate that for yourself in such a beautiful, succinct way? Because I'm sure it was like a journey to get there. As someone who is very much considers myself a hybrid, I'm neither here
Yeah,
nor there. I'm this
yeah,
blend of a lot of things, but I still consider similarly I'm very American in my values. But
Yeah.
Brazilian in my culture and in the
Mhm.
language and in my perspective of the world. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to find, there's very few groups of people that like in the Venn diagram of my life,
Mhm.
like cross over in a way where they fully get me.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but yeah, I'm wondering how long it took you to find that and define that for yourself.
In a lot of ways, I feel like I've always had it, but then
Mm,
also in other ways, it's still in development. So I think like from a very young age, let's just call it like elementary school, because I started kindergarten in the US, having already done kindergarten in Jamaica, because in
mhm.
school you start school earlier.
Yeah,
So I started
same
kindergarten.
with me. Same,
And
except
so
I was in second grade, so not as cute. I had to repeat second grade.
but it's very interesting. And so there were little things immediately in terms of what my mom's expectations were of like what the school environment was going to be like versus what it was like. In Jamaica, like there's a very heavy emphasis on the values of like communal responsibility, respect for elders, like education as the single most important thing like worth pursuing. That was huge in my family. And I think just from a very young age, even in elementary school, I realized that like my mom's expectations for me were very different than the expectations that I was hearing articulated like in the classrooms that I was in or even amongst some of my friends. And in some ways it was like typical immigrant things, like sleepovers were not a huge part of my life growing up. My mom was, pretty uncomfortable with the idea of like sleepovers. The idea as an immigrant and like just sort of Jamaican culture is like, I don't know these people. I don't know these parents. And
Hmm.
it's like everybody else is going to this sleepover. And I will never forget that I got to go to a sleepover. I think I was in first grade. I probably begged forever to go to this particular sleepover with a very good friend. And my mom had met their family once or twice, which is why she was like even remotely comfortable with it.
Hmm.
I remember I got home the next day and my mom asked me like, "What'd you guys do?" And I was like, "Oh my God, mom, it was so fun." But I got a little scared because we watched like Child's Play, like the Chucky movie. I'm 6 or 7, right? Probably
Oh my
6.
God.
My mom was furious, called my friend's mom. I'm completely embarrassed, obviously, and was
Obviously.
like, "What are you guys doing over there?" And I think I probably didn't go to another sleepover for like several years. And I was like, huh, it's different at my house.
I
My
mean, child's play, that's a reach.
I
That's a
mean,
lot.
I think my mom was correct.
Yeah.
What were we doing at a first grade sleepover watching Child's Play? But like people have different rules in different homes. And my mom was just like, yeah. And she would remind me, like, we are not American, we're Jamaican. Like you guys are growing up here, but you're keeping the same values that like we grew up with. And there are times when you're younger that's like a pain because I want to be out there with everybody who gets to like go to the mall after school and do whatever. And they're like talking back to their parents, like all the things that you think are cool when you're like younger.
Yeah.
Oh, my parents are so strict. And now I'm just like, oh, thank God. I really feel so lucky that I've always had parents who instilled that in me.
Obviously, you went to Harvard, graduated from Harvard College, Harvard Business School, the dream immigrant child story. But was there a big push for you to go and achieve the highest
Mhm.
of what they perceived, especially with education being such a cornerstone? Or did they
Yeah.
really like with my parents? It was always about following my bliss. So it was like my dad's tagline. They sacrificed a lot to come here. We came a little bit old when I was a little bit older, and I have two brothers. So for them, it was always like, we know how hard it is. The odds are just against us to even be here. So like they never put this insane pressure on us. They just wanted us to find our own footing, which I really appreciated. But I'm curious how that was for
Yeah.
you and what inevitably led
Mhm.
you, because you've had a really interesting beginnings
Yeah.
into entertainment.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, find your bliss sounds like absolutely beautiful. That was not the mantra of my household. God bless us. And for me, it really was like you have the ability to be anything you want to be if you work hard, and anything you pursue, you should be the best at it.
Yeah.
So that was really my grounding and my foundation. And I think it has had a long-term impact on how I've approached everything. My parents have said that I've always wanted to go to Harvard since I was like 5. They said, I don't know how you like came up with that, but it was just an idea that you had, right? I don't know, Carolina. I'm pretty sure there was a little bit of influence there.
Yeah.
I mean, I found out in the last few years that one of the schools that my dad had looked at for his dissertation was Harvard. Maybe that's how I heard about it. But it was just, I always had this sense that, like, I should be aiming my arrows at greatness. So whether it was like when I was in high school and you'd get exams, I remember a specific teacher like where there would be like extra credit on every test. So it wasn't out of 100, it could be out of like
Wow.
120. And I remember one time I got like a 115 on something and I was like, what did I get wrong? My first thought was like, what did I get wrong? Why did I get something off? And I would argue, yes, I see how your answer could be correct, but what about this? What about my answer? Here's what I thought about it. And like when I would bring home a 95 to my parents, they'd be like, before they would say, that's great. They'd be like, oh, do you know what you got wrong? That's just like my wiring. And so I think that for me, the positives of it and the thing that I'm so grateful for is that my parents coming from a majority Black country to the US and very quickly realizing that like race was going to play a role in their journey in a way that like it didn't in Jamaica. Right? There's other challenges. There's like class issues. There's like different people who don't have access to education based on their own upbringing. There's colorism, but there isn't racism, right? There isn't anti-Blackness in that way. And so they brought that with them and saw quickly how like in America, my dad was a Black professor, where in Jamaica, he was a professor, right? My mom was a Black banker or a Black accountant versus in Jamaica. And so they refused to let that create boxes around what we thought was possible. They certainly said you're going to have to work 10 times as hard, but you fully deserve to be at the very top of whatever field it is that you decide you want to commit yourself to. And then I think I had passions like everyone has. I loved singing. I loved dancing. I got a lot of exposure to like arts and entertainment. I remember The Cosby Show was one of the first shows and probably one of the only shows that we were like allowed to watch. I remember sneaking into rooms to watch a lot of other things that my friends were watching that my parents were like, those shows have bad values, right? The Cosby Show had good values, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how that family was anchored in the foundation of love and education and respect for elders and culture. Like all of those things were things that resonated with my family. And so I think over time, I took that advice of you have the ability to be at the top of any field you decide to commit yourself to. Plus, here is a field that I love, which is like arts, media, entertainment. And like from a young age, thinking like, wow, like this is so impactful. Like I look up to the people that I see on TV. I look up to the people I see in the movies. I look up to my favorite singers. Like who gets to decide who gets to be those people? And like without knowing any of the terms for like studio exec or showrunner or director or even like probably actor or whatever it is, like I was just like, if that's a business, I'd be interested in like working in that. And so early on, it was like, oh, entertainment law, right? Because as an immigrant, there's acceptable outcomes, lawyer, doctor, engineer, right?
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, I can do the like immigrant thing, I can be a lawyer, but I can also do the passion thing, I can be in entertainment. So I was like, I'm going to be an entertainment lawyer. And just as I got older, I got through college, I applied to all the law schools, got into all the law schools. And that's when I had to have the moment of being like, I don't know if I actually want to go to law school. And that was the first time that I did the big kind of pivot of said to my parents, I don't know. I think I got to start going my own way, taking my career, making it personal and being like, I actually do want to work in entertainment, like directly. I actually do want to work at a record label and figure that out. And for an immigrant parent, that's like, what? You're going to go into what? When which school is offering you admission? And like you can have a whole set and secure path. But I do think they raised me without knowing that they were raising me in this way. Like they built such a strong sense of confidence and esteem and belief in myself that I was like, now I'm going to go use that. They were like, wait, no, I thought you were going to use it differently. All right, too late. You told me to speak my
It's like
mind.
it backfired. They're like,
Right,
man, we should have
exactly.
been more specific.
Exactly. They're like, you can be anything you want. I was like, great. I'm gonna go be a record exec. And they're like, wait,
They're
what?
like, no, that wasn't the messaging quite we
Yeah.
wanted to. They're like, when we said anything, we really meant within this umbrella. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure that was like a tricky, sticky moment to navigate.
Yeah,
But
it's all worked out. And I think
yeah.
they really get why I'm driven to do the work that I'm doing. And they really believe as well that media is so influential and that there is a need to be more intentional about how we're using it, and that there is a need for more people that look like you, that look like me, that look like them to be in those decision-making rooms. So over time, The fear has abated and now they're just like really excited. Though never completely, never
Yeah.
completely.
My brothers are engineers. So we got two, and then I'm the outlier
Yeah.
weirdo middle child who was like, I'm going to follow my dreams and go to Hollywood.
I mean, they said find your bliss.
And one can debate, am I in bliss? I don't know. It's up and down over here, but
It's a daily thing.
daily struggle, but we keep marching on. But so then how do you go from you begin working in music and
Yeah.
then you have a stint working in marketing and then
Mhm.
eventually this really cool opportunity opens up with
Yeah.
Lionsgate. Talk us through a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would love to say that when I graduated college and started working at RCA Records, or maybe even before that, that I knew that I was going to land in exactly this role. I didn't, right?
Yeah.
But what I was always committed to was like probably two things. One is really allowing my passion to really drive me and my curiosity. So as different opportunities unfolded along the way, I remained curious, eyes open, heart open, ears open to like, oh, this other opportunity. Might I be interested in that? I've never tried that before, but it does sound interesting. Let me give that a shot. And that's how I made my way from the music business to business school, from business school to LA, and in LA, in everything from television, streaming, music, back to music again, film, like tech, right? Always following that mantra. I'm going to follow things that are like truly unique and interesting to me. And I believe that I can bring my skills and translate them anywhere. So that was probably like one.
Mhm.
And then the second is that the story doesn't need to make sense to other people. And it doesn't even need to make sense to yourself while you're looking at it. If
Mm.
you follow the curiosity, it makes sense in retrospect. When I saw the Lionsgate role, it was a very unique opportunity where I was like, they're kind of looking for a unicorn of a person, right? Because the job description was like, we're looking for someone to work in film who could work on inclusive marketing, whatever that means, could work with creative teams and has worked on content, whatever that means, and then also has a deep understanding of DEI and can demonstrate the impact that they've made there. So those are usually three areas that don't overlap. Most people that have marketing experience don't have any content or creative experience and don't have any DEI experience, and all the way across the board, right?
Right, right.
There's no way I would have accumulated that resume if I had done the thing that was the obvious next step from the first job that I had in the music business, right? And so now all of a sudden, in seeing this role, I was able to be like, here's all the things that I've done. Here's why I know that like I can do this. And I have receipts for doing this really vast array of things, including having launched and started a team, right? Because I was going to be building this team
Mhm.
from scratch, which I had done at Facebook, which only came because I like built an intentional relationship with our CMO, really saw the intersection between thinking about underserved audiences as Facebook, the umbrella company, and how underserved and in particular audiences of color showed up to really drive culture on Facebook, on Instagram, with their usage of WhatsApp, and feeling like there was a gap between how we were putting our campaigns together and how we could really authentically speak to those audiences, both in terms of how we actually, what the positioning is, who the agencies are, what sort of creative talent we work with, and like building that team from scratch. And I actually caught up with some people from Meta a couple weeks ago and heard that a lot of the processes that we built, though our team has ebbed and flowed and I'm not there and other people that were there aren't there, they're like, oh my gosh, we still talk about and do a lot of the processes that you built. And like, that is always my hope, is to
Yeah.
like leave a place better than I found it, which is a core principle of a choir that I was in college called Kumba, which means like literally in Swahili, one, it means creativity. And two, it means leave a space better than you found it. And then, especially when you are working in anything connected to DEI, whether you have it in your title or not. And I think for those of us who care about representation, care about inclusion, and are putting that into our work in any different number of ways, whether as a marketer, as a producer, as a director, I'm constantly trying to think about how can I build things that will outlast me and how can I embed it in a way that it will be very difficult to extricate, even if you decide I don't want to do it anymore.
Interesting. Yeah. That's very smart. And I love just to just like
Basically.
piggyback on what you're saying, because I like to let this land for listeners because a lot of people they've been listening to the show long enough. They've been out here during their
Yeah.
journey and they all know like the path is not linear for any of us. And people who are at the sort of beginning stages, whatever that looks like for them,
Yeah.
often want to know like the right steps to take or the right thing to do,
Yeah.
or if they're looking to start. And I always like to bring up examples, especially recently, of reminders of if you just lean into where you are and you start with where you are. And like you said, you follow your curiosities and you don't overstay your welcome too, because if
Yeah.
you're learning and grabbing things for your tool
That's
belt,
right.
the way the path is going to unfold is in ways that you could never have predicted. In the same way, like you said,
Right.
you could never could have imagined this role was going to exist,
Yeah.
which feels tailor made for you, you know,
Right.
in a crazy way. But you just follow those curiosities and you showed up and brought your best self, your most authentic self
Yes.
to all of these environments, left your mark. And then you can look back and connect the dots and go, oh my gosh, look at how all of these things intersect to now
Yeah.
position me where I am here. And I think
Absolutely.
for all of us who are pursuing something that like isn't standard or linear or easy, like there is an excitement that comes with that because the
Yeah.
path can look at so many different ways, but it's also scary because like you aren't going to any traditional like a ladder that you're climbing of what's going to
Yeah.
happen. And one could argue that even that's no longer the case with the way that the whole economy and job
Yeah.
market of this country is going. So
There
just
isn't
really,
really any traditional anymore. Like
that
I
it doesn't
think,
even mean anything. But 20 years ago, when we were both in
yeah,
college, coming out of college, like, there was like, okay, if you do XYZ statistically, you're going to be getting
yeah,
this in return. And now it's like, I think a lot about the kids graduating now, you know, and just how are they
yeah,
plotting their paths and their opportunities. It's a whole thing. But I just wanted to drive that home a little bit more because when we're lost or feeling discouraged in our own journeys, feeling like you don't know what the next steps are. And I say this as someone who is in a season of huge transition in my own life and in my own
yeah,
career. I don't know what's next. So I truly like this message is like for me, but also for everyone listening, that if you just trust the
yeah,
process, right? And you just trust the timing of things and you could keep showing up like the way things
yeah,
unfold. It's this interesting
yeah.
zig and zag that is really beautiful retrospectively.
And I want to say something too about something you said about showing up and
Yeah.
bringing your best self, because I think the third thing that has always been a driver for me and the North Star is like working hard to absolutely bring your best work to every role that you're in. And I think sometimes that doesn't get said enough because you can follow your passion, you can lead with curiosity, you can even be diligent about trying to connect dots and build relationships and all those other things. But like the working hard piece is like critical. And I
Yeah.
think about it in two ways. Like one, working hard to ensure that whatever you're bringing to your role ends up becoming something that's almost like one of one, right? Because you are in the role, it's being done in a certain specific way, right? Yes,
Hmm.
diligence, excellence, but also innovation, uniqueness, disruption. Like that has been a hallmark of every role that I've had.
Mm.
Even when I was an assistant, like I was constantly coming up with ways that I could do it differently. I remember starting when I was starting in the music business, and there was a drawer. I was interning at A&R. There was a drawer of demos that nobody ever listened to because nothing good ever comes in like from off the street. That was the thinking. And I'm not even saying that thinking is wrong, but that was the thinking, right? People were busy. And I was like, once they gave me like a bunch of tasks and I checked them off, I was like, I need to think about what I can like, how can I create new work for myself and embed myself in different conversations, right? I went through without anyone asking me. I told my supervisor, I was like, I want to go through that drawer of CDs that like nobody has time to like look at or listen to and let you guys know what I think. One, it allowed me to develop my own creative instincts because I might listen to something and then play it for my boss and they'd be like, here's why it's not good. And I'm like, okay, great, thanks. Didn't know that. Maybe I was too permissive or like I was too accommodating. I wasn't thinking about the right things, but also leaving them with a system for here's how you can actually track and log demos. Here's how people can actually listen to it and review. And this isn't a story that ends with, and I found the next blah, blah, blah. But I got so much out of that exercise and I demonstrated so much to the people around me about my initiative, my innovation, my commitment to excellence, my willingness to work hard and do things that other people weren't willing to do or didn't have the time to do. And I think that has served me so well in every opportunity. And I think as you get more senior inside of a corporate structure, I think sometimes that can get neglected a little bit. People aren't always thinking about how to do their job differently. And so
Right.
you can distinguish yourself in a role that maybe 10 other people have had before you, right? Or if you're a producer and it's, yeah, there's certain things that like producers always do, and you're going to do those, right? But what are the things that producers don't always do that just occur to you, because you're curious, because of your lived experience? And what kind of impression can that leave on the people that you're working with that will make them think about you for that next thing in a different way? I think you have to constantly be doing the work and also being able to articulate the story around the work and brand yourself, because the immigrant mentality sometimes can be simply summarized as keep your head down and work hard. That's not what I'm saying. Work hard and pick your head up, right? And make sure you're talking to people about the work that you're doing and that you're learning and you're exposing yourself.
Yeah, and it brings me to something that you have a great series of articles you write for LinkedIn, which I think is so fantastic and seems to be such a great outlet for you, and a place where you just keep it really real with your thoughts on what's going on across the industry. But there was something you wrote that really resonated with me that was about feedback and how who you take it from. It's actually from a podcast you did recently. Who you take it from is so important. And there are people who are advocates and there are people who are distractors. And especially when you're navigating in Hollywood, there's so many relationships that blur the lines between personal and every job likes to be we're family, but then it's never family. So as you elevate, how do you learn to really be discerning and know who is an advocate, whose feedback you should be taking versus who is a distractor?
My time in tech was pretty impactful in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways was around feedback. So I do think that in entertainment overall, and maybe even a lot of other corporate cultures, feedback, and by which I mean direct feedback, is not a skill that every executive, and I can just speak for inside of the studio system, it's not a skill that every executive really has come up the ranks knowing, right? We live in more of, unfortunately, what tends to be a like, I'm going to say the feedback about you in a room that you're not in. Me and my other colleague are going to align, and then we're going to know why we're not going to go to you for the next job, or we're going to know why we're not going to like, but you're never giving that person the feedback. I will say like tech has a very strong culture of like feedback is a gift, right? And when you think about that, what I would add to that is like feedback is a gift. So I decide what to do with it based on the giver, right? There's certain that I wouldn't accept gifts from.
Love that.
Right. And so I get to still embrace feedback as a gift, but I get to be discerning about the gift giver. And so how I've learned that discernment over time is like, as I'm building relationships with people, I think I'm a person who is pretty consistent in every room that they're in. I am extremely outgoing. I'm really opinionated. I'm always the first person to speak when someone says, so does anyone have questions? I sat in the front of the row in class, and I do it in seminars and summits and like conferences. Like that's just who I am. And for some people, they love that. And I can tell because they reach out to me when I'm talking to them, they seem engaged and interested. Like when I ask them for quick advice or feedback, they make the time. Like when they are working on things, if they can bring me in, they do. So if someone like that gives me feedback, especially feedback that is critical or constructive in any way, or things that I can be doing better, I really value that, because I'm like, this person has demonstrated that they actually are on board with like me as a person. They like the things about me that maybe other people like don't really seem to like as much, right? So I'm like, okay, they see me, right? They see the value of who I am. They believe that what I have to offer is impactful and important and valuable, and they want me to get better. Versus I think we all know what the opposite of that feels like. Like the people that you reach out to and like they get back to you, but not super enthusiastically. Like when you're talking to them, like their eyes are like scanning the room to see if there's someone else that like they should be talking to, or the people who whatever. And like people do that. And this is no shade on those people. But I think that you have to therefore then be discerning about when you're getting feedback from people who you feel like are not fully on board with you, like what you do with it. It doesn't mean immediately that feedback goes into the trash bin, but it means that I'm really thoughtful about how I interpret it. I might take that feedback from someone that I might consider an unreliable narrator for me to someone that I really trust and say, I got this feedback and it was challenging and I don't totally trust this person, but I trust you. And I want to know, have you seen that? Do you agree? Do you get where they're coming from? And having those people around you who love you enough to be like, yes, I think you're amazing. And also, this is true. You actually are a bit judgmental. And I'm like, okay, I'm still working on that. And so I think it's not about running away from feedback that's hard to hear. I think we will not grow if we don't get feedback that's hard to hear. but you as the recipient of the feedback. I had another professor at HBS who said advice is an experience good, by which she meant unlike something that's like a hard good, like ketchup or like a television or something like that, where there is an objective standard by which you can measure if it's good or not, right? Does the ketchup have the right amount of sweetness and saltiness? Does it taste good with French fries? Okay, it's good ketchup, right? Advice is not like that. You can give two people the same advice, and it might be great advice for one of them, and it might be terrible advice for the other person. And so you have to be able to know that it's okay for me to take in every piece of feedback and to push some of it back out and say, that's actually not going to be that relevant to me.
Yeah.
Right? Based on how I want to move through the world, I don't want to do that. Like I've had so many people tell me, you are so outspoken on LinkedIn and Facebook. You're almost too outspoken on LinkedIn and Facebook. I don't know how you're going to move through these corporate spaces because you're really open kimono about like when you're annoyed about something in Hollywood, like you talk about it. When you're seeing something that is not inclusive or that feels racist or sexist, you talk about it. That's going to be tough for you. I received that with a spirit of thank you so much for telling me that. I actually do see the ways in which you're correct. And yet I don't want to change that. I'm not working on that respectfully.
Right. And you believe that the right teams and the right companies, again, are going to attract, they're
Absolutely.
going to be magnetized to that transparency versus the opposite. And you
Right.
don't want to be in community or working, especially working because it's such an intimate space with people who don't understand that empirically about you anyway.
Be so bad. And it also
Yeah.
would be like, I wouldn't be able to bring the superpower that I have to that company. Like, how helpful is it going to be to them if like they believe I'm one type of person and one type of executive, and then I get in there and I show up completely differently? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to allow you to hire the person that you want, right? If you
Yeah.
want outspoken truth teller who's going to be ruthlessly like committed to us being our best selves and talking about the hard things, then I think I'm one of the best people you could hire for that. If you're like, that's not exactly what we're looking for, it would be terrible if you hired me because it would be oil and water. You'd be like, why is she speaking up so much? Right.
Right.
And I can't bring my best work because
And you're being underutilized in that scenario too. I
yeah,
think sometimes employers don't know what they want too, which is they think they
they
want an
think they
outspoken
want the truth
person.
teller.
They think
Yeah.
they want the truth teller, but when you tell the truth, they're like, well, it's not exactly, I've had those
Yeah.
experiences, and that's really challenging to navigate out of and find your way out of those situations because it can feel it can become hard to not internalize and make it a personal thing, right? Because
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much of the magic, the thing that is intrinsically you that you bring to the table is a personal aspect of you because yes, you have all the other qualities that make you qualified for that job. So there is
Yeah.
a part of it that is a rejection of something about you and the way that you're showing up that isn't resonating. But I
Yeah.
think I've at least learned that the quicker you can get past it and push past that for yourself,
Yeah.
the quicker you can get to the people that again are vibrating at that same frequency and
That's
can
right.
really get what it is that you're trying to do and especially as a professional in this landscape. Similarly with
Yeah.
me having this podcast, I've been very outspoken about a lot of things and I don't expect any employer to go through and listen to almost 100 episodes of the show. That would be impressive, especially when I started. I had a lot of different perspectives and a lot of
Yeah.
different ideas on things. It was 5 years ago. I've evolved, I've grown. Like
Yeah.
that's natural. People that get that, I think, is
Totally.
exactly like who you want to be aligning yourself with, which is why I always give the advice that there's so much that you can do and so many groups and communities you can be a part of. You have to make sure that you're with people that get you, not all the time. You don't want to be in a
Right.
vacuum, right? As well, you want to be
Right.
challenged, but you could
Right.
waste a lot of precious energy and time
Absolutely.
trying to make advocates out of people that are never really going to get
That's
you, is my point.
1000%. Like find your people. And your people
Period.
doesn't mean like your yes people, but
Yeah.
find your people that you're like, when you guys debate, you're like, "Ah, they're making really good points. Actually, I probably need to evolve on this." Been lucky enough to be able to find that in different places. Like sponsors, I think is another thing that's huge. Like finding your sponsors, the people who want you to succeed. I think, especially as a producer, it's such a collaborative sport and you need all different types of champions, like people inside the system, people outside the system, people who are actors, people who are directors, people like all of that. And I think that finding the ways to show up as who you are so that your people can find you, and then finding your people, I think is so helpful.
Yeah. And to be patient with yourself and give yourself grace that I think it does take time, especially
Yeah.
when if you are on the younger side coming to Hollywood and navigating all of this, there's a lot
Yeah.
of circles of people where you can get lost in the
Right.
shuffle until you actually click in into what it is. So great advice. But I want to get back to a little bit more about your role as the
Yeah.
head of inclusive content. What does that mean? What do you
Yeah.
do every day? How are you using all of this superpower that you have to continue making progress, especially right now in light of a really challenging couple of years that we've had in this industry, and in
Yeah.
light of so many DI roles getting slashed, so many women of color getting impacted by this, so many executives of color? Like it feels like the people that are focusing on this, it's just getting narrower and narrower. So how is that impacting how you're able to show up every day and continue to do this important work?
Yeah, I start from a place of I really believe storytelling is the most effective canvas that we have to create change, right? People listen to and engage with their favorite films and their favorite series in a different way than they
Yeah.
engage with anything else, right? Usually we are going through life a little bit with our arms folded, being like, I already know what I believe. And like, I'm looking for the people that believe that, right? And we do something so amazing with stories where like we unfold our arms, we get comfortable. We're willing to hear from people that we've never heard from before, hang out theoretically or hypothetically with people that we don't encounter in our day-to-day lives. So I take it really seriously, and I feel really fortunate to be in a role that is focused on creating more inclusive content. And when I was building it from scratch, I wanted to make sure that it did a couple of things to make sure that it would be an area that the studio and that the industry hopefully finds value in. Like one is thinking about if we want to build more inclusive content, we can't just be thinking about casting only. There's a holistic system that results in the films that are made. So how can we be having conversations about inclusion during the creative development process, during the green light process, during the marketing and publicity and distribution process, to make sure that at every single critical point that determines whether or not we decide to go with this writer or that writer, target this audience or that audience, spend this amount or this amount. Are we talking about how inclusion is playing a role in there? And I'm really proud to say that we've been able to build that. So I think that the way that we approach the work at Lionsgate is pretty different than I think even roles that sound similar at other studios. At least that's how I understand it from my friends and colleagues that are doing similar work, is that there aren't really a lot of teams that are as horizontally integrated. And what that also allows us to do is like we take it seriously to scale the work that we're doing in our team in the other teams, right? And so I want every development exec that is working with us to feel like they can do a similar assessment on their projects without even talking to me. I want it to ideally be something that every creative exec can think about. It's not just sort of like you have to talk to me or someone on my team to find out if it's doing well from an inclusion perspective. You can do that, right? When we're building the marketing campaigns, having a template of these are the questions we ask to build a more inclusive marketing campaign, right? It's not just about the multicultural marketing tactics that we might do. It's really more holistically how we're trying to make the function of marketing more inclusive, more cognizant of underrepresented audiences and how they drive culture, more cognizant of who the vendors are that we use to build our campaigns, all of those things, right? So you can keep doing that work. It's not just about checking in with me. And so I remember I was in a Greenlight meeting a couple of years ago, and we were talking about a script. And one of the execs in the room said, the whole time I was reading the script, I just kept hearing your voice in my head. I feel like you ruined script reading for me because I'm like, there's a white savior trope here, there's magical Negro here, like this female character is very underdeveloped. And I feel like I used to just be able to read scripts and enjoy them. And now I'm constantly thinking about all the things that you talk about. And I was like, did I ruin script reading for you? Or did I fix it? You should be thinking about that stuff, right? And none of that means that the project might not still be compelling, right? It might
Right.
still be super interesting. It might still be a director you want to work with. It might still be a story that you want to tell, but making sure that you have an honest conversation with yourself about what is exactly happening in this script and what are all the messages, and thinking about which of them you think, actually, you know what, we should spend some time on developing those female characters more. Because guess what? That's probably going to make the casting process much better
Right.
because actors that are reading it are going to see a more developed character, right? And maybe be more willing to attach, right? I was having another conversation with someone about the dearth of female directors and directors of color in certain genres, right? And without naming any specific genre, I will say that like when you look at different genres, there are certain genres that seem to be more deeply embedded and committed to like being a little bit paternalistic, a little bit patriarchal, a little bit less like racially inclusive. And so when you go to those directors and you're like, would you like to direct this? When they read the script, like sometimes they're going to be like, no, right?
Yeah.
I don't see myself in this project. And that doesn't mean that like women can only direct things that center women and people of color can only direct things that center people of color. Absolutely not. But I
Right.
think you have material that is maybe potentially actively antagonistic to some of the groups of the people that the directors belong to that you're trying to solicit, it can become a really tough path. So if you are developing something, I think it's great to know there's a couple tropes and stereotypes that are embedded in here. Are they critical to the story or might we want to change them? We are missing certain perspectives on the creative team, and those things would help us because I really try to ground the inclusive content work in commercial concerns. This is not a social justice venture. We're not running a nonprofit. I believe deeply in narrative change, but like narrative change is only possible if films are made and people see them. So there's no sense in me advocating for things that I think are like quote unquote super duper woke and not entertaining, right? Because
Right.
like
Right.
I'm going to see them. A tree that
Right.
falls in the forest and no one is around is not heard, right? Whether
Right.
it does or doesn't make a sound. So how do you
Exactly.
balance those things and make sure that like I want us to be looked at as a team that is really committed to helping the teams we work with find the most commercial, the most authentically inclusive, the most compelling material. And if there are notes that we can give in terms of how expanding inclusion can help it be more compelling, can help it be more commercial, can help it reach more audiences, I think that's really great. So I'm super proud of the work we've been able to do to aid the company in like moving the slate in that direction.
It's wild to me that this role isn't just like a staple at every studio, at every production company, because can you imagine just
Yeah,
how the collective change we would make if we all had this version of you in-house somewhere that isn't just looking, like you said, for social justice, but it's just good business at the end of the day, too.
yeah,
And is actually
absolutely.
bringing that narrative back into the conversation instead of people getting bogged down with, oh, we just want to be inclusive to accommodate the groups that have been marginalized forever. And I feel like, on the other side of social uprising, so many promises, so many PR campaigns, so much explosion of an investment and interest in these underrepresented stories that now we're seeing wane, right? And that is slowly disappearing with a lot
Yeah,
of these departments getting shut down. And I know you wrote recently too that we're in the middle of a down cycle with DEI, and that when you are in this moment that you can rest is also resistance. But I'm curious, like, how does anyone find the space to rest when I don't know if at other times it hasn't felt as dire, but it does feel more dire this go around because so much progress was made over these last 3 to 4 years.
okay.
And I feel like we've just been catapulted back in a way that, and this is an outsider's perspective, but
Yeah,
again, from every conversation I hear now, it's things are shifting back to the way they were, where you really need to have like a white man on your team to get anything made, to get attention, all of that stuff. So, how do you reconcile with all of that personally and professionally to still be able to show up and bring all of yourself into this work?
what an easy question to answer, Carolina. It's tricky, right?
Yeah.
So I'll say a couple of things. I'll say something to you that I'm also saying to myself and that I'm saying to my team, like all the time. The more dire the crisis, the greater the need for you to protect and replenish yourself, right? Sometimes it feels like the more dire the crisis, the harder I need to go at every minute, right? There's no moment to spare, right? But if you empty the vessel that is you, you have nothing to give, right? And so I've tried to always hold this dual perspective of I am personally invested in this work, but I do not take this work personally, right? Like you have to have that sort of mentality because if you take it personally, every time there is a setback, you will take it as an affront to you and your person and start to ask the questions of what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my community? Why don't they see us? Why don't they see our value? And that is very like, that's going to bring you down, right? I am personally committed, but I'm also like fully convinced that the changes that I'm advocating for are going to happen. It's a foregone conclusion, right? We're experiencing the last dying gasps of people who are realizing that the future is going to move on with or without them, right? And they're holding on to the power that they have to try to hold it in place, but they're not going to be able to. Gen Z is very clear on what their expectations are. People of color who have started speaking up and demanding inclusion are not going to sit back down. Women that have become activated and care a lot about the future of like women and female leaders, we're not going to just sit back down. And I think they know that on some level. And so you can see this moment as sort of like it's darkest at dawn or whatever that is, where it's going to turn. And I think they know that. But in order for me to be useful, when it turns again, I have to have some energy reserves. And so I have to make sure that I create a little fence around myself. So when I'm doing the work, my job is not to convince every Hollywood gatekeeper that inclusive content is more commercial content. And like, my job is not to get every movie greenlit. Like, I don't have that power, right? My job is to show up with the best possible argument every single time, with like data and receipts to back me up, with the power of my convictions and like a thoughtfulness. And then once I've done that, it's your job to get it. It's not my job to make you get it. If you're not there, you're not there, right? And I think what's so beautiful about producers, and what I would say to just pivot back to that, because I have so much respect for the audience that you've built and like the community that you exist within, which is the producing community, right? You guys are the furthest upstream in terms of the content flywheel that like we as studios get to react to. And what I love is like, when you have producers that recognize that like telling stories that organically and authentically include people that are in our audience opens up creative potential. It doesn't restrict it. When we're giving notes, like we try to be discerning about like, I try as much as possible to give notes that I think have on the other side of executing that note is tremendous additional creative exploration that wasn't possible if we had limited the canvas of characters to white straight men. Let's just use that as an example. It's not just, I want to have women in it and people of color and queer people because I'm trying to make a United Colors of Benetton ad and you're stopping me from doing it, right?
Right.
I can remember a certain script where it was like, there was a Black female character, and I noticed that in this particular script, like all of the Black characters had no father figures. Everyone was estranged from their father. And I'm like, well, that's not fully authentic because I have a great relationship with my dad. And I know lots of Black people that have like great relations with their dads. And I remember I had seen a stat that was like, Black men on average that are fathers are more involved in their kids' lives than men from other races, not less, but in media, they are depicted as always, right? And when I was talking to the exec about it, I was like, this particular character, if their dad was in the story and not just like absent figure, there's a way where that person could interact in the story in a different way that expands a different storyline that maybe solves a problem we were having over here with someone that didn't feel totally grounded. So I try to approach it from a creative's perspective. I try to approach it from a producer perspective and a storytelling perspective and not just a social justice perspective, because I think that that is what this moment is calling for. There's certain moments where people want to hear what you think because you have the D, E, or I in your title, right? And there's other moments where you're going to bring that toolkit anyway, but you're showing up in a different capacity, right? They want to hear your opinion now because like you're a producer, or they want to hear your opinion now because you have a relationship with the studio, or they want to hear your opinion now because of whatever it is, right? You are not one thing, you are many things. Like, so similar to like, I get frustrated when, you know, people would talk about marketers of color or multicultural marketers as like almost like they're half a marketer. Like you understand this market, but you don't understand the general market. Like similarly, I would say if you are a woman who is a producer, a person of color who's a producer, a queer person, like that doesn't make you half a producer, right? Where it's like you can only talk about this one thing. It makes you twice a producer, right? Because of course you understand what is happening in the worlds that you don't live in, because that is our mass culture that is produced, right? I
Yep.
know tons about white culture, about male culture, about all the other things, right? But I also know things about my culture and cultures that are excluded. And when you bring that together, that is a superpower. It's not a deficiency. I'm like, that's a
Yeah.
feature, not a bug.
That's
It's
beautiful. I could just listen to you talk all day. Just the way you phrase things. It's so shiny and like exciting and optimistic. So it's really remarkable how you are able to contextualize things in ways that I've never quite heard it put before, even though I've heard this message. But the way you say it just, I don't know, just hits different. But in terms of then what for you, what makes an exceptional producer when
yeah,
producers are working with the studio and an executive, how are they showing up in the best ways to be good partners to you?
yeah.
And what are red flags of people who show up and you're like, oof, this is not the way?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about as I was preparing for this conversation because I've been fortunate to I've been at the studio for over 3 years. Our team is deeply embedded in every single title, especially theatrically. So we get a chance to hear from our development execs and also have our own meetings oftentimes with producers. So I feel like the best producers are the ones that realize at the end of the day, the goal is to get the project made. And the goal is to support that creative process and the creatives that are engaged in making that project to the best of their ability to move the project forward. So I think it's a very tricky balance, right? When you're figuring out as a producer, what are the things that are going to be the sort of the deal breakers for you? This is the mountain I will die on. And if you don't want to accept this part of the note, this is not a project we can make together. But
Mm,
every mountain can't be the mountain that you'll die on. And I've seen people who every single thing is the most important thing to them. And so I would say, as a producer, go in with your understanding of when it comes to this story, here are the things that I feel unwavering about, right? And unwavering doesn't mean I'm unable to listen if someone wants to talk about those things, but I feel really strongly in my conviction around it. And I can articulate why I feel strongly in that conviction, right? And it's going to be pretty difficult to move me off of that. But here's a whole bunch of other things that I don't feel as strongly about. I think sometimes people feel like they have to have a strong opinion that is unwavering about every single thing. And making things in Hollywood is a collaborative experience. And so making things with a studio, you have to understand that there are things that they also care about very strongly. There are ways that they need to collaborate with you. Think about any relationship that you have, whether it's with your spouse, your best friend, etc. If your best friend notices that every single time they propose something to you, you're like, nope, it's my way. Nope, it's my way. Nope, it's my way. How long will that relationship really endure? There has to be some give and take, but that doesn't mean be a doormat. It doesn't mean don't have anything, because I've seen the other side too, where it's in an effort to be accommodating. There are producers who will say yes to absolutely everything. And then sometimes the studio will be like, I just really never knew what their creative POV was. I didn't feel like they weren't producing the movie, right? Because it was,
right.
I would have an idea and then they would just do it. And studios don't have all the right ideas either. And you need
I
someone that
think I
has
think
that
it's
support.
interesting, yeah, because it's similar to how the producer and director relationship really works, where you want someone with a very strong lens, a very strong POV on what they want. You need a vision. You're guiding everybody, and the producer's there to support that vision. But
Like,
if you're not malleable with your vision, that you can't
yes,
collaborate and hear from others and accept good ideas, especially when you get into production, then there is no lone genius in this, and you really need to have the ability to communicate what you want and like you said be able to listen, and sometimes people have ideas that aren't the right thing and then you are that north star to go, I hear all of
yeah,
that, but this is actually where we're headed, so let me show you the way.
totally.
And I think the producer, it sounds like with the studio, has to be that conduit because you're doing that on behalf of the director, which is where you get that trickle down.
Absolutely.
If the
Yes.
director also doesn't have a really clear vision and you're not in a really good marriage, creative,
Yeah.
collaborative marriage, it's going to be really hard for that producer then to advocate on behalf of the director, right? Of
Yeah.
what is important, what are those non-negotiables. And so I always talk about this like when you're signing up for projects, when you're finding your partners, your creative partners, making sure that relationship is super solid, because it's not to say it's going to be tested at every turn, but your values will be tested
Yeah.
because there are going to be inherent challenges that you have to know how to navigate together. So I think it's an interesting parallel because it's you're the conduit for the entirety of the creative team, but you're also that person that's in the middle with
Yep.
the studio.
Producers are intermediaries in a certain way. and they sit between the rest of the creative team and the studio or the network or whoever it is your distributing partner is, and finding the ways to like navigate that with your creative team. They know that when you are representing the project, you are fully showing up on behalf of the team. When you're sitting with the studio, you're able to hear what the studio is saying and think about what is the best way for me to bring that back to my creative collaborators. What is the best way for me to represent, hey, look, I feel like this is going to be like the mountain the studio dies on. So we just got to know. And maybe like, how can we make that as painless as possible? There will always be friction, but like I've seen instances where producers can disagree with the studio like significantly, and still at the end of the day, the studios, I would work with that producer again. Like when things needed to move forward, they were able to move it forward, right? When hard conversations needed to be had with the director or with whomever, or even with me as a studio exec, they were willing to do that. And all the way through, they showed up as like solution oriented, willing to do the hard stuff, committed to moving it forward, and like I would work with them again. Versus other times where it's like, oh my God, thank God we got through this. That is really what I feel like drives it, because at the end of the day, like producing is like, you want that to be a repeat relationship. And like your creative collaborators may stay the same and your studios may change, or your studio may stay the same and your collaborators will change. But like people will need to have like high recommendations of what it was like to work with you and what were the difficult moments like. Because like when it's greenlit and everybody's happy, like it's easy to work with every producer when you're saying like what they want to hear. But what is it like when like you guys are disagreeing? How do they feel like you're showing up when your director has a very strong point of view and your studio exec has the exact opposite one?
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like there's a way where even in this role, we've had to develop that as a team, because as a woman of color, I am first and foremost, I'm always committed to the community. I have to show up. I care about showing up for, you know, women filmmakers and actors and storytellers and producers and people of color and queer people and all of that. But also at the same time, like I work for the studio and I have my leadership needs to know I'm going to show up aligned with the studio. And so how do I build those relationships where filmmakers and producers feel like they can connect with me and know that I'm going to have their back in the meetings that they're not in? And also, I'm going to be honest with them and say, this isn't going well. And I don't feel like the way that you're delivering this note is really landing. And it's like alienating people, right? How do you have that hard conversation? I think it's critical, but a lot of people don't want to do it. And I think that is really, to me, the marker of a great producer is you're willing to do the hard stuff and people still like you after.
Yeah, perfectly said. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, so I have one final question for you before we move on to the lightning round. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you guys approach with this initiative that you have, looking at materials, looking at scripts, and what are the benchmarks that you're looking for to be right for the initiative?
Yeah, so when I got here, it was important to me to make sure that when we're reviewing scripts, it's not just what's Kamala's opinion on this script, right? I wanted to ground something that felt consistent, repeatable, objective as much as possible, right? And so I looked at all of the thought leadership out there in terms of how people are talking about inclusion in entertainment and created a framework that really embeds a lot of that thinking into it, right? And so looking at everything from character diversity, character intersectionality, tropes and stereotypes, dimensionality and portrayal, so things like the Bechdel test and other things, and then creative team diversity. And then this idea of what we call groundbreaking inclusion, which can be anything from like a story helmed by an underrepresented director who's not always empowered to tell their story, or representing people in a way that's very different than how they've been seen. So I'm so proud of so many of the films that we've made, but I'll give a shout out to one right now, which is Joyride, which was a film we had last year.
Yes,
I love that movie. And I think it was so brilliant because it was a funny R-rated comedy, which we have seen, but centering people from communities that we don't always see in that environment and showing it in an authentic and culturally relevant way, right? And so I feel like I look at all of those different things. And so what we're hoping to do in the next year or so is be able to share that framework, because I would love for this thinking to become as ubiquitous as like coverage. And that doesn't mean that we have a scorecard, right? Or we have a formula and we only make things that fit this formula, right? What it means is that every story has an opportunity to become more inclusive in some way. And if we can think about what are the ingredients of making an inclusive story. It's not that you're trying to get 100%. It's trying to make sure you're having the right conversations. In the same way with your creative team, you would talk about what are the stakes in the story and do the characters feel real, right? What is the motivation, right? Whose perspective are we getting? Right. I want you to also think about like how inclusive is this world and how culturally relevant does it seem to the one that we live in? Right. There are female characters, but do they feel empowered? Do they have agency? Right. That's how we're going to address audience feedback around things like this feels very token. This feels very one note. This feels inauthentic. Right. It's like I want it to feel really textured and nuanced and rich. And like this can help to be a guide that I think can get people asking themselves the right questions as they're developing. So that still ends up being their story, but their
Yeah.
story plus up of like, and now it can be more open and more accessible to more people to broaden your audience.
I don't know if you're ever going to publish this guide as like something that everyone should have, but it should be like mandatory part of a producer's toolkit, certainly, but even for writers as they're thinking of ideas and they're in those early stages of thinking of character, like how do they already take this stuff into consideration so that it doesn't always have to be an afterthought or a note after the fact that a producer or an executive is giving that then someone's like, wow, I wasn't even aware of that. How do you already start creating from a place where these concepts already sort of inside of you?
Exactly. Like in an
Yeah,
organic way, right? And I
in an
think
organic way.
I don't want it to feel forced. And I also want to like understand that like everyone comes to this work at a different stage. And I
Yeah.
don't want it to just be like all the women and all the people of color and all the queer people are going to make Hollywood inclusive and like straight white men, don't worry about it. Like we got it.
Yeah.
There's lots of straight white men creators that I think do want to contribute to this work, do want to tell inclusive stories. Like, where's the guide and framing for them so that some of the work
Yes.
is theirs too? It's not just our responsibility.
Exactly. It's a collective, and I think that's allyship. That's truly what inclusion means. And it's no one gets left behind and no one gets a pass. We're all responsible. We all have a social responsibility to do this work in this intentional way.
Yay. Thank you for
So,
asking that.
yes, no, thank you for that. That was a really amazing way to end this incredible conversation. Thank you again for taking the time. It's been
Of
such
course.
a treat to spend this hour with you and all of the wisdom you have to impart on me and my listeners. So thank you. Before I let you go, I'd like to close with this fun little lightning round, which
Yay.
are just 5 fun questions, just a little to get to know you. And then there's a fun question for
Cool.
you as well from a previous podcast guest. So every
Oh,
producer leaves a question for the next producer is like a new thing I've started doing. But I actually think you've already answered a question without knowing it, which is really
oh,
interesting. But okay, so lightning round, if you're ready, here we go.
ready, ready.
Okay. So what's a song that teleports you to a happy place?
Right now, I'm going to go with something from Cowboy Carter because that's all I've been listening to. So I'm going to go with 16 Carriages.
What is the latest piece of art that moved you? It can be a book, a film, a TV show, etc.
Ava DuVernay's film
Yeah.
Origin. I saw it again recently. The number of ideas and themes that are embedded in that, and yet the beauty of the storytelling, the humanity, the authenticity. If you haven't seen it, it's
Yeah. Fill in the blank. When I'm overworked, blank helps ease the stress.
when I'm overworked, reality TV helps ease the stress. For all of
Okay.
my highfalutin thoughts, I love
Everybody's
a
got to
little
have,
bachelorette.
yep, you got to do whatever you got to do to release. What is one of the most worthwhile investments you've ever made? And it doesn't have to be financial.
My friendships. Like, I am so grateful for the community of people that I call friends. I'm returning actually this weekend. I was on a friends trip with some of my friends from college who sang in that choir I mentioned, Kumba. And every time I gather with friends that I've had over years and like now decades, I realize I'm so lucky to have known at an early age that investing in people and friendships matters because there's no replacement for those friendships that have seen you through season after season and know the you that you are, the you that you were, the you that you're trying to become, and just can hold you like in all those spaces. So I think my friendships are the best investment I've made.
Okay, so what is one question you have for the next producer who comes on the podcast?
The universe is really universing right now. I think that like for those of us that are in the rooms where green lights are discussed, I would encourage us to be bold and fearless about sharing your POV, about how you think certain stories can impact culture, and how you think they can impact the business, right? I think sometimes we hold like commerciality and inclusion as in conflict with one another. And I think we're in this moment right now of that heightened backlash where people are immediately basically trying to say like DEI has nothing to do with the business. DEI is bad for the business. Don't talk to me about DEI, talk about the business, right? I think we have to take that back. And so for those of us that are fortunate enough to be in rooms where green light or content investment is discussed, we have to keep talking about the positive connection between the business and the inclusion, and making it clearer for those that don't see it, that we are seeing both bottom lines. We're not solely showing up as woke warriors. We're actually thinking about the future of the business.
Yeah. I love it. Woke warriors. That's your hashtag. Okay. So then what is one question you have for the next producer before I let you go?
How can those of us that are inside the system, whether it's inside the networks, the studios, what is the best way for us to show up as advocates for the stories that you're trying to tell? And what is one question you've always wanted answered from someone in this seat that you've never been able to get a good one to?
So once they ask it, I have to come back and ask you.
You have to come and ask
Okay.
I will email them if I think I know the answer, or I will find someone that knows the answer.
Done. I love this. I love this. Okay. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Kamala, for your time, for your energy, for your spirit. You're just a gem of a human. I'm so glad to have had this time with you. We're really grateful. So thank you.
Thank you for guiding a beautiful conversation. I'm honored to be sitting here virtually with you, and I can't wait to hear how it's received. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. Thank you so much.